Welcome to the Spend Advantage podcast by Verisource. Spend Advantage is the competitive advantage for your spend across 100 plus vendor categories. This podcast is all about interviewing amazing people, company, and solutions that will help you 10x your top line growth as well as bottom line savings for your business. Hello, everyone. This is Victor with Verisource. Welcome to another episode of the Spend Advantage podcast. Today, I'm super excited to have a good friend and also a partner, LV, who's the CEO and co-founder of Tailorflow with us. Tailorflow is an AI market research platform that gives you vendor analysis and vendor comparisons at a cost-effective rate. How you doing, LV?
Doing wonderful. Thank you, Victor.
Yeah, great to have you. Super excited about the conversation today. First of all, obviously we call our podcast Spend Advantage because we're all about partnering and working with companies and founders that are disrupting, the incumbents, the old, slow, expensive companies out there. And this is a category that I think the audience is going to love. If you don't mind, maybe give the audience a little bit of background about yourself and sort of the founder story would be fun.
Of course. I've been a serial entrepreneur all my life. I started in natural gas compressors and 3D printing, and had a venture-backed 3D printing business making orthotics a while back. I left that in 2019. And met up with my co-founder, Todd, a little bit before that, and we started working on various ideas. We've made a lot of pivots to get to where we are. So we started in low-code integrations and then pivoted to cloud cost management and eventually landed on this current idea during the YC batch, which was Winter 21, which is to really help streamline the vendor selection process. We would say that, between myself and my co-founder, we have a lot of experience doing enterprise sales and also selling API products, whether it's in the health and health space or even CPG space, and to big conglomerates there. And I think a key thing that we have in common, and that allows us to work on Tailorflow and of course get access to decent sized customers. We do sell to enterprise most of the time.
Yeah. No, amazing stuff, man. Again, let's talk about the elephant in the room, because when you think about market research, most people will think of Gartner, right? That's kind of the name brand in the market when you're talking about market research, vendor analysis. So obviously that's what everybody thinks about, but just based on your experience, what challenges do you think, customers face when they're using something like a Gartner?
Firstly, Gartner has, I think, a bit of an issue readily tailoring their insights to any specific use case, especially on demand. So you tend to rely on Gartner to provide their analyst services, which would require you to book a call with an analyst and do what's called a inquiry. And these inquiry calls can sometimes take months to book, and it's a half hour to 1 hour call with an analyst, sometimes a junior analyst. And they kind of go over your use case over the phone with you to figure out what may be relevant. And the pool of vendors that they select from are, of course, very mature and things they know very well. And sometimes you don't really get the emerging vendors part of the analysis. And, it's a helpful call, I'm sure. And once in a while, Gartner will then do more follow-ups or documentation reviews of any internal documents on how you're doing your vendor selection and the priorities you're considering and how you're weighting vendors based off your requirements. I would just say that Gartner primarily struggles with making this easily accessible to their audience, making this tailored to their use case. It's still on the customer's shoulders to figure out what's relevant to them and do a thorough analysis that's worthy of, a multi-million-dollar decision.
So here's an interesting thing, because I see the same thing. I look at Gartner and, again, I think a lot of these incumbents or market leaders been around so long, they get comfortable. There's not a ton of competition in the space because it's very time intensive. Like, it's not easy to just go start a, Gartner or a research company. They've had a lot of time to do it. But now with AI, that completely changes. But I'm just curious to get your quick thoughts on, why do you think companies still want to use Gartner? My personal thinking is there are just too many vendors, and there's always new vendors or solutions in the market coming to the market that are that could potentially solve a problem, but customers just don't have the time or know how to know who's the right vendor or even know about the vendor. Is that why you think people still utilize Gartner or rely on Gartner, or what's kind of your thought, or even just market research companies in general?
I think we're in a transition phase, but I think Gartner has a lot of authority, and they built a great reputation. From the days of Gideon founding Gartner, he built a great brand around really well done research and of course understanding all the different aspects of every market as much as he could, and expanded that well. And they just have a great reputation. But you're right, now it does feel like they're a bit ripe for disruption. Uh, I would say in the CIO's office, making a decision off of a Gartner recommendation is a bit like buying IBM 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where you cannot go wrong by doing that. You will not lose your job for doing that. However, I'm kind of seeing that sentiment change within the ranks. Maybe it hasn't reached the CIO yet, but definitely in the enterprise, from the director level to the VP level, we've had so many calls where people instinctually do not trust what Gartner says anymore, because there is this perception that um, Gartner has become has a bit behind on some things. It may not be as flexible as to what it covers, and tech has become so much more complex. We've entered practically a Cambrian explosion of tools since the AI boom, and even before that, where uh, you know it's almost impossible to stay on top of everything if you're just using humans.
Yeah, and that's the next couple questions is really going to dive deeper into that. So the next question for you is, what makes you think or believe that Tailorflow can do this market research cheaper, better, faster, easier? And those are that's why we started Verisource. That's why we started the Spin Advantage podcast, because I think it's all about the information gap. Company just didn't know. All they know is Gartner, right? That was what's available. And like you said, there is, but I think you guys have figured out a fantastic model. But why do you think you can kind of achieve those four value points?
Well, we have two major pillars to what makes Tailflow special. The first is, of course, our ability to scale research affordably and more or less on demand. And we use a combination of novel techniques like LLMs and RAG, which is Retrieval Augmented General AI, and of course have a very sophisticated workflow around kicking certain anomalies in our research to human analysts who are leading experts in their field. So everything we do is human in the loop, but we've made it so efficient that when a human analyst, quote unquote, enters 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 the chat, they're able to focus their efforts where they're necessary. And so that's how we couple the best of both worlds, being able to scale all the grunt research efficiently with the latest in AI, and being able to maintain authority by having experts correct any drift or correct any hallucination or correct anything that may be anomalous, and we have the tools to pick up on which areas they should focus. So it makes the workflow very efficient. The second component is our decision-making framework, which can be applied at practically any level of market research, whether you're just doing something in the discovery phase, trying to understand the universe of vendors that's relevant to you, or you're down to the nitty-gritty of figuring out exactly which vendor you're going to POC with. This is just some very sophisticated rules engines in the background, and a thoroughly analyzed and developed framework for making decisions, where we weight dimensions, features, requirements according to the specific use case at hand, and transparently rank and rate vendors for that given use case. And that framework makes it really fast for people to figure out, okay, based off all the research we've done, how should we pick the right vendor for us, without having to resort to these monster spreadsheets or having to resort to using Power BI and a bunch of other tools to run the analysis. And I think we've just cracked the science to make that decision framework really useful.
So one word, or I guess two words, that you mentioned, I want to dive like a minute into that. So you talked about on demand, and when I look at research, and this is something again, we have audience of executives and procurement and finance and IT. I think I want to kind of simplify this messaging because it's so important, right? Because of your unique capabilities, this on demand concept. I mean, you think about a lot of these research companies spend a lot of people, time, hours to do all these things, but it's very static because of the cost of doing this research is so high. Once they do it, it's not like they can do it on demand, right? And it's very time intensive. So, can you kind of talk about the benefit of maybe doing this on demand or being able to do this on demand model versus, again, not just against Gartner, but maybe the older traditional way of doing analysis there?
Of course. So I'd compare ourselves mostly to the desk research, the manual desk research processes that these enterprises or consulting firms have to engage in internally and do it over and over again. Even at the big four firms, they spend on average about 2 days of desk research, like full time days, to research a single vendor in an analysis. And of course, they're using very expensive talent to do this work, and it's not very iterative. They keep having to go back to the drawing board once they get internal feedback and external feedback on what's important and what's not. So the beauty of Tailflow is, as you're creating your decision document, Tailflow is pulling the use cases that are most relevant to you that you've indicated, and then giving you all the tools to further refine every nuance of your use case. And so you can, within a few minutes, go from something maybe a bit generic to something extremely specific to your use case. And I think that's really beneficial to the decision-making process in this day and age, because things change so fast, and also because we're in an economic environment where we don't really want to assign resources to spend weeks and months researching vendors. That's not a core competency. So for enterprises of all sizes, being able to make a decision for your stack quickly is going to be a major differentiator in how fast you move and innovate. So, and it's a pain point that virtually every technology leader faces is, I have a need. Who's going to fill that need? Are we going to build something internally? Are we going to buy something externally? And if we're going to buy something externally, how are we going to choose that? How am I going to document that decision? How am I going to have all the CYE I need to ratify this decision so I feel comfortable with it? So that's why this on-demand piece is so important in this day and age. We just don't have the time to do research anymore.
Yeah, I no, I love that. So follow-up question for you. Let's talk about some examples, right? So people can visualize. So can you give us maybe two different examples of how companies can utilize the data and research that you have?
Of course. So I'll give one example. We had a customer, mid-market company. They were making a major overhaul of their ERP systems, and also were investigating whether they should use an iPaaS and which iPaaS to go with. So they were considering several vendors like MuleSoft and Microsoft and so on and so forth. There were a lot of vendors being considered. And this was, not a huge decision, but it was definitely going to be somewhere in the hundreds of thousands to a few million. And the issue for them is that they had very little internal expertise on what iPaaS vendors could do for them, whether the pricing was right, how they could model the ROI or their TCO of any given iPaaS vendor. So they basically started the process by signing up for Tailflow, having a quick call with our analyst, just to get a bit of the lay of the land, and then started customizing themselves their decision document within Tailflow, and within 2 weeks made that huge decision. So they went from 0 to 100 in 2 weeks, including signing the contract with the given vendor. And still today, that decision is hugely successful, and we're almost a year later. And it saved them a bunch of money because they were able to run the financial analysis within Dealflow to model out how much more efficient the winning vendor would be against the runner-up. And that was a major deal maker for them. So that's one example. And the second example I would give is we had a customer, a very large Fortune 100 type company. They had to run analyses to figure out their data integration and connectivity strategy at large. So they had this huge pool of vendors they were considering, like in the somewhere between 50 to 100 vendors, and it was going to be a multi-part recommendation we'd have to make. It was not just about picking one vendor; it was about figuring out a strategy of multiple vendors and stitching them together. And so it was really interesting for us to see that over the course of a couple of weeks, their initial shortlist of about 5 to 10 vendors that they thought may be worth POCing with, none of them actually made it to the final shortlist because of all the revelations Tableful made. And they were a bit shocked, of course, about how many gotchas their initial shortlist vendors had that were going to make them wholly incompatible for their use case. And we just saved them a ton of time on implementation, a ton of time, of course, communicating the decision across the ranks of the company, all the way to the CIO's office. And the documentation we were able to provide to this company, again, more or less on demand, was so thorough that they're able to get sign off more or less immediately because of all the CYA we provide. Every trade-off is documented in the document as you make your changes. Every single rating is explained. So it's easy for a decision maker to go through these documents that get generated on the fly and see that, wow, I feel comfortable with this decision. I can sign off on this because we've done our homework.
Yeah, I love these examples. And I want to, I mean, obviously Verisource, we have built a brand focusing on saving companies time and money across their entire vendor spend. And so I love, how a savings partner like yourself, kind of how you describe, you create that ROI for them. So I want to go a little bit deeper into a couple of those examples. Again, specifically talking about, can you give some either examples or thoughts on how can a company specifically save money? And then we'll follow up with the saving time part, but the saving money of using a platform like this, how does that quantifiably work?
So there's a more exacting way to do things, and then there's a more high level way to do things. But you can imagine that when you're trying to find some kind of equilibrium, right? There's functionality, which is really important, and then, okay, well, how much is that functionality going to cost me? Do I go with the best vendor, or do I go with the vendor that's 90% there but 50% cheaper, right? So these are really important trade-offs that you make. So pricing decisions, I think, are never made in isolation. They're more or less made, of course, alongside the what you're getting out of it, right? So so at a high level, we understand the pricing of various vendors, even in some more opaque categories where there's a lot of custom pricing. We can directionally guide our users and kind of explain that, hey, relative to this vendor, or relative to vendor A, vendor B will charge more per API call by about this much, or relative to vendor C, vendor B will be more efficient for the amount of data you're transferring. So we can provide directional advice, even though, and that can be done in the app, even though pricing is custom in certain categories. When the categories are less about custom pricing, like you go to a cloud vendor's website and see down to what unit of compute and how much you would pay for that. Then we just ingest those models wholesale and provide tools where people can manipulate those usage metrics and kind of see how things would cost on a on an upfront basis, on an ongoing basis, and then we have the tools where they can map out net present value over 5 years, cumulative benefit, and of course ROI. The TCO stuff requires a bit of customization because then we have to understand more about the labor requirements to get this implemented within the company. But that's an additional service and add-on that we offer to our enterprise customers. So we do save people money by giving them really helpful, high-level directional indications of what vendor is going to cost more based off our knowledge and the RFPs we've seen. And then we can go really detailed with our enterprise customers where we're modeling out everything from TCO to ROI and showing them, of course, the net results from between vendor A and vendor B over the course of 1 year, 2 years, and up to 5 years. And we can do that more or less on demand as well.
Yeah, I no, that's awesome. So then if you expand that into specifically now saving companies time, you kind of gave some couple examples before, but talk about how IT procurement can really focus on saving time by using this type of platform.
Of course. So the amount of desk research that IT and procurement have to do is maybe less than some of the contributors on other teams that are like coming up with the suggestions that, hey, we should go buy Datadog or should buy New Relic, and here are the reasons why. But they still have to feel comfortable with the decision before they sign off. And so there's some level of fact checking they want to do, and I kind of sense that within the procurement team, it's difficult because naturally they might not be experts at these categories. Like, why would you expect a procurement officer to know everything about APM and observability tools or about iPaaS tools or about CRMs? But they would like that knowledge so that they can feel comfortable what they're signing off on. So Tailflow saves them a lot of time because I think it eliminates the need for so much back and forth between the leaders on other teams and the procurement officers in terms of understanding why a certain vendor was picked over another, because things are so well documented. And the procurement team can transparently see that, hey, like Tailflow as a third party has validated this decision, has provided a lot of documentation around it, and that in a pretty unbiased manner, and that I can see exactly why this was recommended. So if I'm willing to read the document, I'm able to understand how we got to this conclusion. So I think that saves procurement officers a lot of time, and they definitely need time savings because I believe procurement is one of the most stretched teams in any given organizations. There's too few procurement officers for how much procurement is going on, and this could definitely save them time and reduce their stress.
Yeah, you hit it right there, man. It's pretty incredible. I mean, we love procurement teams. We think they're tremendous value to every business. But man, you're thinking one, two procurement people can manage 1,000 vendors or be an expert on all of that. Like that's not possible, right? Like,
Exactly.
but I think that's what sometimes company expect. And I think with Tailorflow, you're kind of that secret weapon with that data behind them. So as
Oh,
we wrap up this,
Victor,
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing to the procurement officer thing. One very interesting use case is that the procurement officers can offer Tailflow as a resource to other teams, so that
Mm.
like it can speed up, build some favor there and speed up their research as well. So because even the ICs do not have the knowledge on everything, and procurement being able to offer this to the team at large, I think is hugely beneficial as well. Just want to touch on that.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. So as we kind of wrap up on the conversation here, I got a $1 billion question for you to kind of close this thing out.
Sure.
So you in the beginning talked about Gartner being the name brand. They did a great job building the brand, and which is trust. A lot of times brand equals trust. Like that's what people think of. And so that helps with the research, right? Meaning the research that comes out, the customers needs to be able to trust it. Obviously, time goes on, sometimes people, pay to be on the research, pay to play kind of thing. I think, definitely creates more challenges for customer using some of those bigger firms. Now, the $1 billion question, LB, is can you convince a enterprise that they can trust the analysis and report that you guys, put together,
Mhm.
and why? How and why?
Of course. So the reason they trust Gartner analysis is, of course, because of the methodology, but mostly because of the senior analysts or principal analysts that are employed at Gartner who are actually experts in their field. I don't think that Gartner customers care as much about what a junior analyst thinks because they've been 2 to 3 years in the field, out of school potentially, and may not have all the industry knowledge necessary to ratify an expensive decision. So Tailowflow didn't wholesale replace analysts, but we've replaced the junior analysts with our unique use of AI and our decision making framework. But we still use principal analysts to ratify our research. So, like I mentioned earlier in the call, how things ultimately get vetted is they get vetted by a leading expert in the field. And funny enough, sometimes those leading experts are former principal analysts at Gartner. Sometimes there are people who've authored many books on this particular category you might be researching in. So we really pick somewhere between at least a top 10 expert in this field, and pay them well to ratify the research and keep it fresh and keep us posted on things that change. So I do think that we're able to provide the same level of authority at Tailowflow, but we're just doing it in a much more scalable manner. And what we replaced is, again, the junior part, which is not as valuable as we think.
Yeah, great answer, man. So the last question that we always ask our guest is, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, you're a serial entrepreneur. If you have to give one personal and or business advice, could be anything, that you're most passionate about, what do you think that advice would be?
So to founders is when you start something, commit to 10 years, because it's going to take that long. So, well, it could take that long. Of course, some of us get luckier sooner. So that's been a learning for me because my first startup, we hit product market fit within 6 months, and we were 50 or so people within a year and a half. Like, it scaled super fast. We got lucky with Tailowflow. It's taken longer, but I have such high conviction I've built over time, that this is going to be a phenomenally big business because of exactly like the amount of time we spent talking to customers, the amount of time we spent iterating the product, crafting something to perfection has been an absolute delight. But to get here, I've had to, stick with that commitment that I was going to build this over 10 years and maybe longer, because sometimes that's just what it takes to build something hopefully massive.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. It's such a great advice, and obviously everybody wants instant, scalability and satisfaction. But no, thank you for all the conversation today. And again, we're so lucky and happy to have you guys as a savings partner for all the companies out there. So appreciate your time and look forward to growing the partnership.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Victor. Take care.
That was an amazing episode of the Spend Advantage podcast, where we show you how we can help you 10x your bottom line savings and top line growth for your business. Hope you enjoy the conversation. And if you want to get the best deals from the guest today, make sure to send us a message at sales@verisource.com.